Hello everyone. This is another in my series of national overviews for Warhammer mod nations for the game Dominions 5 Warriors of the Faith. I'll put a link to the Sombre Warhammer mod compilation pack in the description, and today we'll be looking at the Tomb Kings, also known as Nehekara. As usual, this will be a kind of a teaser of the nation, an overview to introduce you to the nation, but it's not really going to act as a guide, and I won't be giving you detailed strategies for expansion, pretender design, or going much into the magic paths you can use and so on. As with my other videos, I'll give you a quick outline of the nation. I'll go through each of the recruitable troops, each of the recruitable commanders. I'll look at the heroes and multi-heroes that they can get. I'll go through the national spells, including the summons. They'll have a very brief look at the pretender options available to them, not going into design, just having a look at what they can get. And then some thoughts about scales. Here is the national overview for the Tomb Kings. As usual, the actual nation name is not the name of the faction, it's the name of an important place in that faction. Nehekara is the name of the old empire that the Tomb Kings used to have before everything went wrong for them and they were cursed with undeath. And they're trying to rebuild that, and so that's why they're called Nehekara. Their race consists of undead humans. They prefer heat scale 2, and they have half income and pop loss from their death scales. So there's already a big hint there that you'll be wanting to take death scales, and there'll be more on that. Their military consists of shielded infantry, archers, chariots, with powerful and resilient animated statues. You really can think of their military as being split into two halves. One is the undead humans and their various things they ride into battle on, and the other is these animated statues. Their magic is death with fire, air, astral, and earth. So an okay selection there. And their priests are strong and have chance national spells that strengthen the undead. For special mechanics, they have no independent recruits. So if you take over a province that would, let's say you take over a barbarian province, you can't recruit barbarians from it. You can recruit some of their units. Some of their units are available to recruit outside of their forts, but you can't recruit any of the independents. And I believe you don't get any of their independent province defense either. You use their national province defense. They have no mercenaries. The mercenaries are all costed extremely expensive, so they can't hire mercenaries. But their troops have no upkeep at all. All their recruits have a death scale gold discount, which further incentivizes you staying in death scales. They actually start with death scales set at 3 as well. And their statues require a lab and a temple because they need to be constructed by these artisans. They're magically animated statues. And a lot of their different units are locked behind a positive dominion requirement. So it depends which unit or commander we're talking about, but you need, when you reach Dominion 1, positive Dominion 1, you unlock a bunch of things to recruit. At 2, unlock more. 4, and then finally at 6. 6 is the Dominion required for the most expensive things. You have to bear that in mind when you're picking your scales, and when, especially at the start of the game, that's very relevant. They have normal forts, but their Necrotects, that's one of their commanders, can build better forts. They can upgrade beyond the standard. In terms of their starting gem income, we have the Valley of Tombs, which gives you 3 death per turn, so a decent death income. And then they also have the Valley of Gods that gives them 1 fire and 1 earth per turn. So death, fire, and earth really are their primary paths, but of course they do also have air and astral. So let's discuss the units they get. We'll start, and we'll just go through each of these in turn. We'll start with the very basic stuff, the Nehekaran Light Spearmen. This can be recruited outside of forts as well, and this is also true of the Nehekaran Light Infantry. So they're Light Spearmen. Let's talk about some of the basic things that are true of all of these Nehekaran undead. So they are all undead, which comes with various benefits and disadvantages. One of the biggest disadvantages of being undead, of course, is that the enemy can use banishment on you. But you will note that their starting magic resistance, the magic resistance of their most basic troop, is 13, and that's because the Tomb Kings are animated by a much stronger form of necromancy, a very ancient and powerful spell, which gives them stronger resistance to just being banished from the world. Because these are skeletal undead, they have pierce resistance, that's half damage from piercing weapons, which makes them a bit tougher against bows and arrows, in particular crossbows, things like that. And they do have a good shield. So although they have no protection whatsoever, they are somewhat resilient to missile attacks. This shield gives you a slightly better parry than a normal shield, but it doesn't have a huge amount of protection. It's kind of halfway between a normal shield and a kite or tower shield. As undead, they can last a very long time. They don't have vulnerable age. They have no encumbrance, so they don't fatigue out from fighting. They're tireless fighters, and they can also march a very long way. They have very good map moves. They're quite mobile. Another advantage of being undead is high cold resistance. The cold doesn't bother them. They have total immunity pretty much to poison. And they don't need to eat anything, which can be very useful when you're sieging or defending sieges in particular, or going through provinces with very low population, which you will see more of because of your presumed death scales. They also have spirit sight, so they don't need to worry about invisible units, unseen units, things like that, or indeed they have perfect dark vision because they have spirit sight. So a lot of traits that come from just being undead. Now, usually long dead in Dominions are mindless and have 50 morale, and there's quite a few disadvantages that come from being mindless, and not that many advantages compared to having morale 30. Nehekar and undead do still have their minds; their souls are still kind of trapped in this undead body, and so they do have their minds, but they don't fear death. They've had that completely removed from them. They don't rout. Morale 30 units are immune to fear. If your side routes and decides to retreat, they will retreat, unlike a mindless unit, which will just kind of dissolve. But they won't individually fail morale checks, basically, is what morale 30 means. It's what your pretender has. So they'll stay there, they'll stay fighting, and they have quite a lot of useful immunities. They are inanimate, which makes them immune to certain things and is generally good, although I think there's some disadvantages that come from that. And because they don't need to breathe, they are able to go underwater and fight underwater. They are poor amphibians, though, so their stats suffer very badly when they go underwater. You can see the stat penalties there. So looking at their stats, these are basically the stats of Dominion's long dead, except with the different morale, because they're not mindless, and the better magic resistance. But they have the similar low number of hit points because they're somewhat brittle, although with their piercing resistance, they're piercing weapons are less likely to take them out. And they have pretty decent stats. Strength 10's okay. Starting with a basic attack skill of 11 is nice. And this diverges a bit from the Warhammer lore because in Warhammer, skeletons are pretty bad at fighting. They've got low weapon skill. But I wanted to stick closer to the way that Long Dead perform in Dominions. And Long Dead actually are fairly good fighters. They've had a lifetime and then a death time of learning to fight, I guess, is what that represents. But then their defense skill is bad because they're kind of slow and herky-jerky. They're not fluid fighters. So in combat, the way that these work is they rely on their shields to keep them going. They don't have particularly good defense skill, so if anything has good attack skill, it can bypass their shield fairly easily, and then they have no protection. So they're actually quite fragile against things with high attack skill, but against things with lower attack skill, they do okay. They hide behind their shield or they dodge the blows. They can sometimes get some repels off with their bronze spears. And they have Formation Fighter, which means that you get 4 of them into a square. That can be a disadvantage when the enemy's dropping Banish all over you because it increases the target density. But they can actually hold a line okay. I wouldn't really recommend the lights over the ones that have armor that we'll have a look at in a moment. But they're not bad as a line troop. Their greatest strength is their morale, the resistances that you get, and also the fact that they require no gold upkeep. Now, if you look at their gold cost, it's at 24, but they have Death Recruitment 4, which means for every point of death scale in the province where you recruit them, you get a discount of 4 gold. And this counts for upkeep purposes as well, not would ever require any upkeep. But if you recruit them in Death 3 scales, and I've always put a note here to tell you how much that will cost, then they're only 12 gold. 12 gold is normally what you'd pay for a kind of above average unit, and I would say stat-wise they aren't above average, but considering their special abilities, they definitely are above average, and the fact you don't have to pay gold upkeep means you can stack up a huge number of these light spearmen. They require your Dominion to be positive to recruit. They only need 1, but they do need it to be positive. So moving on, we've got the Nehekaran Spearmen. So this is exactly the same as the Light Spearmen, except they come with a little bit of armor. They've got a shoulder guard and a circlet, and that tiny bit of armor actually makes a big difference, particularly in their survivability about being, shot up by short bows, things like that, because it just takes off that extra bit of damage. So when you can afford these, definitely take them. If we compare the two in terms of their resource cost, the Light Spearman costs 4 and 3 recruitment points, and the full Spearman only cost an additional 3 resources. So if you have the resources, definitely go for these. However, you can't recruit the Nehekaran Spearmen everywhere, so sometimes you'll just be getting the Light Spearmen. With both of these, and this is also true of these infantry, because they don't cost any upkeep, and that's true of multiple Nehekaran units. There's no disadvantage to stockpiling them other than the fact that you're costing yourself gold in the short term. So you may want that gold free for other things. But unlike with other troops, you don't really need to think about like, oh, I've recruited loads of troops and that's giving me this long trailing upkeep problem. You don't need to think about that at all. So moving on to the light infantry. Light infantry have basically the same stats and abilities as the other Nekar infantry, but instead of having a spear, they have the bronze blade. The bronze blade is a decent weapon. It's got the attack and defense that you would have on a broadsword, but its damage is not terribly high. So they are better because they can't really be repelled because they're high morale. I would say they're better at doing damage and actually surviving in melee than the spearmen, but they can't repel things. So if you want to be able to repel things, get the spearmen in there. They also cost some additional resources. So if you have the resources, they're a preferred choice, I would say. And we have the same thing with the Nehekaran infantry here, where you add on some resources, an additional 3 resources, and you get some armor. These guys are pretty surprisingly good performers in just straight combat. I use them a fair bit. I've used them during expansion before, and they're still only Dominion 1 to recruit. So a decent choice for kind of line holding infantry. They're not great at killing things, but you have a lot of other killy stuff that you can use in that role. So now moving on to their missile units. We have the same suite of abilities and so on as the infantry, but a higher gold cost. So we're now up to 14 gold cost in death scales instead of 12, so a bit more expensive. And you get terrible melee weapons, just a bronze dagger, no armor whatsoever, and you have the same normal stats, precision of 10 being probably the most relevant one to these being bowmen. But Nehekaran bows are quite good. They're very similar to the composite bow, so they're definitely better than just using short bows and things like that. And you can mass a lot of these light archers, and you can do that quite quickly. You also have access to fire magic, so potentially flaming arrows. So yeah, you've got this pretty quick to assemble and relatively nasty ranks of archers that you can build up. You also have an armored version of them, so I would take this if you've got the resources. Basically, just take this over the normal archer. Again, it's the thing where you can recruit the armored version in a fort, and outside of the fort, it's just the light version that you can get. Something to watch out for with these guys, although your troops are well shielded, they don't have very good protection. They do have pierce resistance. You definitely can inflict friendly fire fairly easily with the Nehekaran bows, so you need to be a bit careful of that. But these are nice as counter archers. They're nice against anything that's got low protection that you would typically fight. So I usually build quite a few of these actually, and once you've got flaming arrows, they're pretty nasty. Moving on to the slightly more upper tier infantry now, we have the Nehekaran warrior, which can be recruited outside of forts, but he has the armor. So unlike the armored spearmen, armored swordsmen, those infantry, this one can be recruited outside of forts despite having better armor. He's got the standard 5 protection that they have, and then he's just got 2 bronze blades, and I believe, yes, he has an extra point of defense skill. That's the only difference in his fighting ability, and he's got ambidextrous, so he can use these blades well. But both of these blades add a point of defense skill, and each of them attacks at attack 12. Having 2 attacks on a unit like this, he doesn't have formation fighter, so you can't stack 4 of them into one square, but having 2 attacks on an infantry like this is pretty great. These are much more killy because of the harassment penalties they output and because they're just generally higher damage than the lower quality units. But bear in mind that without the shield, they are more vulnerable, and certainly more vulnerable to missile fire, a lot more vulnerable to missile fire. I would take these over Nehekaran infantry if you're recruiting outside of a fort, obviously, but also if you've got the resources to go with them. And it really depends what you're deciding for your sloth versus productivity scales, I think. But yeah, not bad, and having basic access to a completely tireless 2-sword infantry is pretty nice. Watch out for the fact they don't have good damage output though, and this is all slashing damage, so there's no reduction to the opponent's armor. Now we have the first of the Nehekaran cavalry. And I think I'm going to just skip between the two of these and talk about both of them. So the Nehekaran Horse Archer has absolutely no protection of any kind. He is basically just the Nehekaran Light Archer, but stuck on an undead horse. He has good map move, but it's not massively better than the map move on the archers, because they're already undead, so they can already march day and night, tirelessly. He costs a few more recruitment points. I think that's 3 times as many recruitment points, in fact. Yep. And his gold cost, these were 14 gold cost in Death 3. He is 20 gold cost in Death 3. So they're not that much more expensive in terms of gold, and they're a bit more survivable in melee. They're more likely to escape if they flee. You can't really use these for typical cavalry tactics of like doing flank attacks or anything like that, going around and attacking rear, because they just suck at melee. They don't have any armor, and their only attack is the hoof. He doesn't attack at all, the archer on top. So, what is the use of these? I think it's really just the higher map move to get more Nehekaran bows into place. If you've got cavalry forces, you can use them with. Potentially, you could try and do something with the Dominion's orders for like fire and stay away from the enemy. You could try and do that old horse archer tactic, but I have never known that really work. So yeah, those are the horse archers. And then we have the horsemen. So horsemen wear a bit more armor. They carry a buckler, which makes them a bit more survivable, although bear in mind the buckler is not a fantastic shield at all. It's just a little bit of a bonus. It's not really making you much tougher against missile weapons or anything. And they have significantly better melee because they have the Bronze Lance. They actually have a weapon. It has a charge bonus. Bronze Lance is not great. It's basically just a light lance that isn't iron. And they have the hoof attack. But they're not very expensive. They're only 24 gold cost in Death 3 scale. So in terms of light cavalry, that's maybe like slightly more expensive. I think a not very good light cavalry is usually around 20 to 25 gold cost. But they are definitely viable for doing attack rear, going and doing the flank attack where they can do some damage with their charge because it gets over the fact the charge bonus will help against the fact they don't do very high damage, and they do have 2 attacks, and they do have okay defense skill because of the buckler and the fact they're mounted, so they can survive a little bit in combat. Of course, they are vulnerable to banish and the like because they don't have any more hit points and they are more expensive. Yeah, so definitely some drawbacks there. They require Dominion 4+ to recruit. Just to go back over what Dominion these require, the Cavalry require Dominion 4+, the Nehekaran Warrior requires Dominion 4+, and these, I think these are all Dominion 1. Yeah, so these are all at 1. Once you get to Dominion 4, you get the Nehekaran Warriors unlocked and the Cavalry unlocked. Now let's talk about a much more serious infantry. This is where things start actually getting pretty good. The Tomb Guard. I really love the Tomb Guard. I think they're fantastic. They may even be a bit undercosted. I guess we'll see what use people can make of them. They require Dominion 4+ to recruit. They have the usual things of their resistances, the fact they cost no gold upkeep at all, and they are poor amphibians. They're still skeletal. They're 18 gold cost, so if you compare them with the basic infantry, that is an extra 50% on top in terms of cost. They cost significantly more resources. This is very important. If you want to build tons of Tomb Guard, that is a very different resource proposition from building tons of their basic infantry. They are a bit tougher. They've got 2 additional hit points. They have much better protection because they have better armor, and I think, yeah, they have some natural protection built in. Because of the enchantment sustaining them, they're a little bit tougher. They come with Bodyguard, which can be situationally useful but isn't terribly exciting. The most important thing about them is that they have considerably better stats. So they have 12 strength instead of 10. Their attack skill goes up to 12 instead of 11. Their defense skill is up to 10, so they get +1 defense and +1 attack. And then they also have a very nice melee weapon here, which is magic. It's quite rare to get magic weapons on your basic recruitables in Dominions. This is definitely a national strength of the Tomb Kings. The Tomb Khopesh has got good stats. It's basically like a magic broadsword. That's the best way to think about it. And yeah, so with that, they're kicking out 18 damage. It's slashing and magic at attack 13, so they can definitely kill some things. And they're relatively tough, for a Nehekaran unit. Higher protection, and they've still got a decent shield, the Nehekaran shield. The next flavour of Tomb Guard, the difference is just the equipment. So all the stats and things are the same. Instead of having the very nice Nehekaran shield, it's got the significantly worse buckler, But in exchange, it has a much more terrifying close combat weapon. It has the Tomb Glaive. Even though it's carrying a buckler, the Tomb Glaive is a two-handed weapon. It can use both the buckler and a two-handed weapon at the same time. And you can see here this does slashing and piercing, so it's a little bit better against armored things. It's still magic, but it does significantly more damage because of it being two-handed. So we still have the bonus of the +1 attack and defense, just like that, but rather than doing 6 damage, it does 10. So an extra 4 damage, and it's two-handed, which adds on more damage. So we've got 25 damage they can output against 18. So if you want the more survivable unit, go with the Shielded Tomb Guard. If you want damage output, go with the Tomb Guard with the Tomb Glaive, a really nice weapon. Cost and everything else the same. Resource cost for this one, is it the same? Yes, they have the same resource cost. And then finally we have the third type of Tomb Guard. The third type of Tomb Guard, stats, etc. are all the same. However, this one does have Formation Fighter, because these were used to fight in the phalanx formation, which can be useful. And it comes with the Tomb Spear, which is a long spear, has length 4, so definitely more usable in terms of repels. And if we compare its stats with the others, it's less damage. It starts at damage 3 instead of 6 or 10. And it doesn't have the defense bonus, but it still has that attack bonus. When do you use these guys? Well, I would use them exclusively when you're going to make use of the Formation Fighter, and exclusively when you're going to want to do repels against the opponent. If you want to just hold a line and you're not really bothered about their killingness, then the Tomb Guard with the Spear and Shield are the best at doing that. However, remember that with Formation Fighter, you need more of them to hold a broad front because they pack more into each square, 4 rather than 3 into each square. You can also mix in these Tomb Guard with the spear, with the spear-armed Nehekaran down here, because they also have Formation Fighter, and you can mix and match those to get 4 in each of the squares. So on to another missile unit and the first of your 2 sacreds. This is the Asp Archer. They can only be recruited in the capital. That is also true of their other sacred. The Asp Archer has similar stats to a Tomb Guard. Basically, it's got the same hit points and strength as a Tomb Guard. It doesn't quite have the same bonus to attack skill, but it does have that defense skill. It's more like a Nehekaran Warrior's stats in terms of its actual fighting stats. They have the same resistances, etc., that the Undead have, and they cost 26 gold in Death 3 scales, so not terribly much more expensive than your other stuff. Require no gold upkeep and require Dominion 4+ to recruit, like the Tomb Guard. They have the more basic set of armor, not the Tomb Guard's armor, but they do come with some natural protection. So their protection's not the worst in the world. Nehekara in general, its undead stuff has not got good protection. Its statues have fantastic protection, and we'll come to that, but their skeletons are not terribly resilient. They're somewhat brittle. They are sacred, of course, and they come with a bronze dagger, which is not a very good melee weapon, so we can already tell this is not at all a melee sacred. But then they have the Bow of Asaph. So we have a bow that does magic damage. That's exciting. That's like having flaming arrows, because flaming arrows is good against things like elementals, stuff like that. This can be great against fire elementals. That can be great against things that rely on their ethereality or invulnerability rather than just having actual protection. So you're already doing magic damage, which is fantastic. And then the Bow of Asaph is precise. It is long range. It is fairly high damage, so a good bow. And then if it does manage to damage, it does strong poison. So if you're up against things that don't have the best protection in the world, protection that can't just always turn away 12 piercing magic damage, then when you do land it, you're going to be getting strong poison, which is 15 points of damage, basically guaranteed. There's like a plus-minus DRN in there, but on average 15 points of damage, which will obviously ignore armor and things because it's internal, but happens over time. So Asp Archer, I think pretty good sacred for the cost. I would want to build plenty of these. You may want to take a bless that's specifically built around making them good. They come with built-in good precision. They have excellent precision on their bow, so a total of 15 precision when they're actually firing their bow. As the enemy gets in closer, pretty much all the arrows are going to be landing roughly on target, so you'll be able to really pelt things. And if they don't have the best protection, they don't have the best shields, and they don't have poison immunity, then you will kill things with that poison damage. Then the other sacred is rather different. It's certainly melee focused. It comes with Sun Ore built in, which is a very strong ability, which means if you're not in darkness, they basically have the effect of Ore 1, which means the opponent has to make a morale check in order to hit them at all. And they have the better armor. They're very similar to the Tomb Guard. in terms of their protection and so on. They have magic resistance 15. If we look back at the Tomb Guard, we can see that's the magic resistance they have, so they're even more resistant to being banished. But yeah, the Guardian of I don't know if that's pronounced Petra or Tra or Petra. I think it's Petra probably. Um, they are formation fighters, so they're similar to the Tomb Guard with the long spears, but their spear is only length 3, so they're slightly less good, slightly less reliable for doing repel tactics. But they do have excellent stats. They've got the attack and defense skill that the Tomb Guard have. They have the strength and hit points, etc. So think of them like a Tomb Guard, but with a Sun Ore. So against lower morale stuff, they are very difficult for lower morale stuff to deal with. And they have this magic spear. So the Spear of Petra is magic damage and piercing. It's attack 1, defense 0. So it's the same as the Tomb Spear, except that it has length 3 rather than length 4. But if it does manage to damage the enemy, it does the Fire of Petra, which is 8 fire magic armor piercing damage and does 3 times damage versus undead and demons. So if your opponent is using undead and demons, you can definitely hurt them badly with the Spear of Petra on these guys. Particularly against, I think, demons. Excuse me, against demons, I think this will come up the most often, but against undead as well, if they're tough undead, as long as you can get some damage in with your piercing 15 points of magic damage, then you can rely on that going off. And 3 times means that we're talking about 18 armor piercing damage against demons and undead if you manage to damage them with that first attack. So can really kill them very nicely. They are more expensive. They cost 30 gold, whereas the Asp Archers cost 26 gold. 30 gold's not very expensive for quite a good sacred, though. You can compare them with things like Heart Companions, which are not outstanding sacreds. And bear in mind these are capital only, so you may not want to base an entire strategy around blessing these guys up. But I would say a good strong sacred. Also available at Dominion 4 and available outside of forts in addition is the Nehekaran Chariot. Nehekara was famous for their chariot warfare, so of course their chariot is quite good. It costs 35 gold in Death 3, which is somewhat expensive. It's quite a few resources at 24, so 35 gold, 24 resources, you may find yourself resource bottlenecked rather than gold bottlenecked. And recruitment points 15. Recruitment points can be a problem for you because of presumably your death scales, meaning that you have the reduction in population and therefore recruitment points available. But maybe you'll be taking order to help with that. I'm not sure. They've got the somewhat longer map move, but not really, over the infantry, but still pretty good map move just from being undead. And then they are size 4 tramplers, so against things that are smaller than them, that rely on very high defense or very high protection and things, trample can be good. If you have a critical mass of tramplers, you can just smash through enemy formations and do a lot of damage that way. And they come with a bronze spear attack, a hoof attack. So this is only used if things are size 4 or greater when the chariots run into them. And they come with the Nehekaran bows weapon, which is actually 2 bows basically. So they get to shoot 2 Nehekaran bows. So you can have these guys sit back on hold and then attack. I wouldn't use them just as archers because I don't think that having 2 bows on a size 4 unit for 35 gold with not a huge number of hit points. You've got more hit points than the typical archer, but you don't have the best protection. You've got a tiny bit more magic resistance. I'm not sure they're worth using just as archers. You want to use them as a hybrid of archer and trampler, basically. That's the way to use these guys. They've got Unsurroundable 1 built in, which is just a thing that chariots have. And they survive better than you would think. I would put it that way. They're better than you would think in terms of surviving in melee. They have a little bit of basic natural protection to help out with their not great armor. The other form of chariot they get, which can also be recruited outside of forts because Nehekara loves to have chariots, is the Nehekaran chariot, which has 2 spears. So if you're planning on trampling the enemy, and you don't want them. There's a kind of a bit of an issue or a bug in Dominions where if the enemy is fleeing, they're running away, and you want to just run them down and trample them with your chariots. If your chariots have missile weapons, they'll often stop and start shooting arrows instead of trampling them over. So you might think, why would I recruit this? It only has 1 extra attack. I mean, this gives it a little bit of an advantage in repelling and therefore keeping itself alive, but it only has this 1 extra melee attack. That's not worth getting rid of the 2 bows to get that, but they are better at running down fleeing enemies. And if you're just planning on doing trampling and not using the bows, then this is the better chariot to use. But in general, I would say use the one with the bows because the bows it's just generally a better option. Now we have reached the first of the statue or statuary units, the Necropolis Knight. And this represents a transition between the two because it actually consists of an animated statue, which is very tough, and then basically a tomb guard riding it, who is significantly less tough. So first things first, this is expensive. 60 gold in Death Rescales, requires Dominion 6, so you will more often just at one of your forts not be able to recruit these guys unless you're really concentrating on getting the Dominion into place. Then you won't be recruiting these anyway. You'll be recruiting your chariots and so on. It also requires a temple and a lab to recruit, despite the fact that it's not sacred. So there's quite a few requirements before you can start making these. But of course, you should get this set up in your capital. You should have Dominion 6+. You should have a temple and lab, of course. So what do you get for your 60 gold, for your 31 resources, for your 15 recruitment points? Well, you get a unit that's not terribly durable at first sight. You know, you have 10 hit points. It's the same as a Tomb Guard. It has the same basic Tomb Guard stats, except for the fact that it's mounted, adding to its defenses. It has the Tomb Spear, but the Tomb Spear, which is normally length 4, because of its size being 4, is boosted up to length 5. So we're talking about a real repel weapon there. Particularly if your opponent does not have the best morale or defense to avoid being poked by it and repelled, so that can help keep them alive. The fact that they're size 4 means that it is only 1 per square. You can fit in a size 2 unit to help them out, but you're only getting 1 of these per square because they're quite big. They're very fast. Well, I would say very fast actually. If we look at the cavalry, we've got combat speed 26 on our light cavalry there. And we've got combat speed 20, but for what they are, which is kind of a heavy cavalry, that's pretty decent speed. Again, tireless, and as usual, they have the usual resistances. But the Necropolis Knight has a nice set of weapons. The Tomb Spear is magic, we've already discussed that. Then you have the Necroserpent Fangs. And I think I need to make a change to the length of these. I think I want these to be length 0 because they're kind of physical weapons. That's usually how Dominions does it. It's not always how Dominions does it, but I think I want to maybe make a change to those. But the Necroserpent Fangs are not terribly accurate, but decently hard hitting, 17 magic damage piercing. And they come with, if they do manage to do damage, paralyzing poison, which is fatigue damage, or that's reduced for large targets. So potentially something that you could deal with the Thug or a very nasty Sacred or something with the fangs. And then they've got the tail, which really is high damage. It's slashing and blunt, so not piercing but higher damage. And the tail has no other special abilities, but just 20 damage is pretty nice. So we've got 3 attacks at good damage. They're all magic. 2 of them are piercing. Pretty good attack output for a size 4 thing. Protection wise, pretty tough as well. We're getting more into the statuary world, so tougher things. And then good magic resistance at 15. Now you might be thinking, this still doesn't look like it's going to be worth 60 gold, but bear in mind when the rider dies, the Necropolis Knight, you still have the serpent left after, and if the serpent survives the battle, then the rider will reform. So let's have a look what the serpent is like once the rider is gone. Let's look in Tomb King Summons Another at the Necroserpent. So this is your riderless Necroserpent. Still has his fangs and tail. Still has good stats. Protection is actually slightly higher because he's not got the vulnerabilities of being a bone bag on top. It's just this statue. And a decent chunk of hit points and okay stats. So this can actually survive quite well. And if it does survive, you get your rider back. So Necropolis Knights, I would say, definitely strong. They may even turn out to be undercosted. We'll see. And although they don't have any charge attack, they do have high damage and fairly accurate attacks. Now this is a unit next, the Ushabti, which has previously proven to be way too strong, and I had to make various changes to the Ushabti to make them a bit more reasonable, including making them more expensive. Ushabti don't require Dominion 6, unlike the Necropolis Knight, so they're easier to get. They only require Dominion 4, you can get them earlier, but they do still require a temple and a lab. When you recruit this, you get 1 of 3 different Ushabti forms at random. So this is your classic Montag variable recruit. So let's go and look at those. They're 60 gold each in Death 3, and you can have a quick look at the stats, but let's go and look at the individual forms in the Summons Another. So first we'll talk about the Jackal Ushabti. Jackal Ushabti is probably the best of the 3 forms. He comes with ambidextrous attacks, 2 of them with tomb kopeshes, which we've previously established, like magic broadswords basically. But because they're high strength, we're talking about really nice damage output. The immediately most exciting thing about this is that they have extremely high protection. 19 protection. Their head protection's a bit lower, but 19 protection overall is really good for Nehekara. It's really good in general. This is really heavy stuff. But it's particularly nice for Nehekara. They've got a big bag of hit points at 30 hit points. These are really durable, really durable units. They also have both slash resistance and pierce resistance. So we're talking about high protection and halving damage from pierce and slash. Your opponent is going to want to have high damage, blunt damage in order to get through their protection. They do have a disadvantage. I should mention that high damage, blunt damage is not terribly common. Like you can use barbarians with mauls to smash these guys up, but it's not terribly common. They don't have the best stats in the world, but having 2 attacks means that they will still land and do a lot of damage. They are still somewhat expensive, of course. They're 60 gold, 34 resources, but they don't cost that many recruitment points. They do have a disadvantage, a couple of disadvantages. They never heal unless they are in a lab province. So if they're out moving around, they're going to get beaten up, and they don't get to naturally heal at the end of the turn, although there are some national spells that help with that. And they are magic beings, which means that they're vulnerable to being blasted by magic being stuff, and they require a magic commander to move them around. But you can see now and immediately that the Ashabdi, being size 3, 2 of these in a square, that's 4 attacks per square. High damage, not that inaccurate really at all, and they're incredibly durable. Possibly they're still too good for their cost. I think we'll see. This is something that's proven really popular with players. The Jackal Ashabti has been very heavily recruited by people. The other 2 forms are the Crocodile Ashabti, who doesn't have 2 attacks, but he does hit super hard because he's got the Tomb Glaive. And then there is the Hawk Ashabti, who has a bronze blade, which is not magic, just a much more basic sword. And then he's got the Bow of Fakth, I think that's pronounced, or Pakth. So everything is the same as any other Ashabti, except he has this bow. The bow is magical. It has very high base damage. It's very long range. It's very precise. Yeah, so we're talking about super high damage long range bows here. You can't reliably get these because they're just a random result of it, but if you recruit enough Ashabdi, you can get a good formation of these, and they can actually be quite terrifying, the ability to fire so much damage at long range. And as they get closer, they get much more accurate, of course. So which Ashabdi is best? I mentioned earlier, it's almost certainly the Jackal Ashabdi, just because of the 2 attacks that they output. And that helps overcome the fact that they're not terribly accurate fighters. I mean, attack 12 attacks are decent, but they can get blocked on shields and so on. So that's the Ashabti. Perhaps they should cost more than 60 gold. I am really thinking about that at the moment. I really do think they're very good. And they're probably better from the Necropolis Knight, particularly as you can get them with the lower Dominion. Then we have the 2 remaining other forms of statuary that they can recruit. The first is the Sepulchral Stalker. This can also be recruited outside forts, which is not true of the Knight or the Ashabti, but it does require Dominion 6 a temple and a lab to recruit. So how often are you going to have Dominion 6 a temple and a lab outside of a fort? Not super often, but sometimes this may be useful. They've got a sprite that I absolutely love. It's a bit brighter than the others, but yeah, I'm just really happy with how this sprite turned out. I think they look really cool. And the Sepulchral Stalker is more expensive than the Ashabti. It's bigger, it's the same size as the Necropolis Knight, so it costs 75 gold. It costs a lot more resources, 47 resources as opposed to the 31 for the Knight or the 37 for the Ashabti. So why is the Sepulchral Stalker more expensive? Well, if you just look at its basic stats, it's less good in melee. It has the attack 12 Tomb Glaive rather than the superior it has attack 11 rather than the superior attack 12 on the Ashabti. It has the same protection as the Ashabti, although it has better head protection, so it's actually slightly tougher. It's got more hit points, so we're already seeing an advantage over the Ashabti in its toughness, although being size 4 makes it a bit more vulnerable to being chopped up, I would say. So why is this so good? Well, it has the Sepulchral Gaze, and the Sepulchral Gaze is really nice. Sepulchral Gaze is a ranged attack. It does 10 magic damage. It's armor negating. but it is resistant, magic resistance negating. So if you have enemies who don't have particularly good magic resistance, then the Sepulchral Gaze can be used at medium range, range 15, to very accurately do armor negating damage to them. Imagine you were fighting against a bunch of high protection Ulmish infantry with their, morale, their magic resistance 9 and so on. Then you could, before you get into melee, fire off a round of these Sepulchral Gazes and kill several of them probably with it. When it does land and do damage, there's then a chance of petrifying, which again is magic resistance negates. So the Sepulchral Gaze can be quite good as an extra weapon, and they additionally have a pretty big patrol bonus. In addition to being somewhat fast, combat speed 18 is much faster than the Ashabti, which is quite nice when the enemy's fleeing and so on. I don't know about the Sepulchral Stalker being a better bet than the Ashabti. I think the Ashabti probably is still a little bit underpriced, but definitely worth trying out, I would say, and they have one of the coolest sprites I've ever done. The final bit of statuary is the Tomb Scorpion, the biggest one, 44 hit points, size 4, same very high levels of protection as the others, and in terms of cost, the most expensive, 85 gold. Requires Dominion 6+, requires a temple, requires a lab. The Tomb Scorpion is obviously the toughest, the most durable. His stats are pretty good, decent attack and defense skill considering his big monster size. He's quite fast at combat speed 20, so faster than the Sepulchral Stalkers. And in combat, he has 2 decent weapons. I wouldn't say that they're fantastic, but 2 attacks is very important. He has got, 3 attacks because the pincers is actually 2 attacks built into it. So we've got 2 pincer attacks and then a tail stick. So 3 attacks for size 4, pretty nice. Pretty high damage, magic damage. They have the disadvantage of being short, these pincers. And the tail sting is a longer weapon, so you can use it to repel sometimes. When the tail sting lands and does damage, it does death poison, which is extremely nasty. So we do have a weapon here that can be a deterrent to very tough, very big things, maybe even pretenders if they don't have the poison resistance to get past this. And, even things with very high poison resistance are usually like a 20 poison resistance, 25 poison resistance. They're usually still going to take a bunch of poison from the death sting. So Tomb Scorpions are kind of a deterrent unit. They're quite tanky, of course. They can kill things okay, but given the expense, I'm not sure about them. I would say right now, at the moment, the Ashabti is the one out of the statuary to build, but they all have fairly different, clear use cases, I would say. The Tomb Scorpion does have a big benefit in having a huge amount of magic resistance. It's got 18, which is considerably higher than the 15 that the others have, and that can help it overcome things that are like destroy magic being or take magic being over, and their magic resistance negates, and it also helps it against banishments and the like. Actually, can they be banished? No, because they're not undead. Sorry. The Necropolis Knight can be banished. The Tomb Scorpion cannot. So that is their recruitable unit lineup. You can see a big variety of stuff. Some of them are very similar to each other, just with different amounts of armor, or like different varieties of Tomb Guard. But yeah, a big variety of units and lots of stuff to fit different cases. It's kind of a toolbox of units. Well, we've talked about the units, so let's talk about the commanders. Starting off with the Nehecaran Scout, which can be recruited outside of forts as well. This is a common thing in the Warhammer nations. They have scouts they can recruit outside, so you have no excuse for not having lots of scouts all over the place and having good intel about what's going on in the world. It's pretty much just a scout. There's nothing much to say about it, except I would say that it's interesting that it does require no gold upkeep at all. So once you've got your network of these out, they don't cost you any gold, which can be helpful. Moving on to your basic commander, it's the Tomb Herald. So Tomb Heralds have the typical tier 1 stats of unsurroundability 1 and then slightly better magic resistance. The chassis is very much based on the Tomb Guard. So they've got a Tomb Khopesh and they've got the heavier Tomb Guard armor. They cost 45 gold in Death 3 scales, so they're your kind of cheap and cheerful commander, and they can lead your troops underwater because they are poor amphibians, so you can potentially take some lake provinces and things using that. You couldn't fight like a whole underwater war using these, and your troops that can go underwater wouldn't work out very well. They're also sacred, so they can benefit a bit from your bless, but that's not terribly relevant to them, and of course they've got increased hit points. Not a huge amount to say about them other than they do have 60 undead leadership. They have no magic leadership, so you cannot lead statues with them. You could lead Necropolis Knights, Although, if the Necropolis Knights died and you didn't have any magic leadership, I think the Necro Serpents would suffer. I think they possibly would dissolve or rout because they don't have any magic leadership. So just something to be aware of there. And like all the skeletal undead, they're lifeless and so on, and do not. They're inanimates, don't eat. All the standard stuff for an undead. But yeah, terrible at leading anything except for the undead troops. And they can't do formations. They're not the kind of commander that can do different formations. They're basically just the okay kind of leader. So that's Tomb Heralds. They require Dominion 2+ to recruit, so you can't recruit that right at the start of the game because you'll start on 1 Dominion, but they are only 1 CP point each. Next up is the Tomb Prince, who requires 4+ Dominion to recruit, and he is 90 gold in Death Rescales, so significantly more expensive. But this is an actual mummified, a bona fide mummy. So he has all of the things that the tomb royalty have. So firstly, because he's a mummy, he's susceptible to fire, and this is something worth remembering, particularly if you're in a hot province, which is likely because you do like heat scales. If he catches on fire, this can be a real problem for him, so something to be aware of there. You might want to take fire resist on your bless. He is sacred. He still has pierce resistance because he is a skeleton underneath those bandages, and he still has the other kind of immunities. Mummies also have Tomb Princes and Tomb Kings have Dominion immortality, so if they're killed within their own Dominion, then they will reform. But his reforming is quite slow. It takes 9 months. The typical Dominion reform, I think, is 3 months, so he's significantly slower to reform than them. He also takes 2 command points to recruit, which is definitely significant. But you do get 80 undead leadership. You get 10 magic being leadership and 10 normal units. He can do formations and gives a squad morale bonus, although that isn't going to matter very much for Nehekara very often. So you can use Tomb Princes to lead around your statues. That's a fairly good thing they can do. They have Taskmaster, and the reason they have Taskmaster is to enable, I think it's primarily thematic, although it's also possibly to enable them to cast certain spells. I'll have to check whether there's a reason for them having it. It might be so that if you prophetize them, they can cast those spells. That's possibly why I put that in there. But yeah, this is the Tomb Prince. He is in close combat, not too bad. He's tier 2, so unsurroundable 2. Decent number of hit points. He's got pretty good protection because he's got the better armor, the royal armor and ornate headdress, and then he's got okay natural protection as well. So you could potentially do some light thugging with these. I wouldn't really recommend it, but you could. If you've got a very good bless, they could potentially do a bit of thugging and just rely on the fact that they're Dominion immortal. But obviously, if they die, they're gone for quite a while. They also have Death Curse, which means if they get killed, something is cursed the rest of life. It's not terribly important, but it's thematic, obviously, but it's kind of a mummy's revenge type curse. Yeah, so this is these guys. Their weapons are magic. The Royal Scepter is very, very similar to the Tomb Kopesh, but it does slash and blunt because it's this kind of like heavy sickle thing. Yeah, that's the Tomb Prince. Not a lot else to say about these guys. Then you have a version of the Tomb Prince which is mounted on a chariot. So he is extremely similar in a bunch of ways. He has an extra point of unsurroundable because he's on a chariot. He's size 4. He's a trampler. He has better map moves. So we've got map move 25 here, and the basic Tomb Prince has a map move of 23. So very slightly better, which can help sometimes in moving an extra province when you're leading a bunch of cavalry. But mainly, I would say you would take him sort of for thematic reasons to go and trample stuff. You could maybe build a kind of like, because he's size 4, you could make a sort of a bigger thug from him, and he is able to repel things a bit more helpfully with his Tomb Glaive, which also hits very hard. Built in 27 damage, magic damage there, hits significantly harder than the Kopesh and the Scepter, and then he has those 2 hoof attacks, which are pretty much terrible. But yeah, he's a bit more thuggable maybe if you're fighting things where you either want to be trampling. 0 encumbrance trampling can be quite nice as well. But he's not terribly different. He does cost a bit more, 105 gold compared with 90 gold. It's worth noting that the Tomb Prince in either form does not have the poor amphibian. He can't go underwater. You give him items to go take stuff underwater, but he can't natively do it, so you'd want to use Tomb Heralds for that. Now we're moving on to the kind of priests and magic users. So first of these is the Lich Acolyte. The Lich Acolyte is a D1, H1, and then he has a random of fire, air, earth, and astral. So there's a few different things you can do with those. Obviously, you've got some kind of communion stuff you can do. There's some fire, death, crosspath stuff you can do. Some fire, earth, crosspath stuff you can do. There's a few different things you can do with the Lich Acolytes, and they're also pretty efficient in terms of research costs. They are not undead, they are part undead, which means that they can preach. So undead in Dominions can never preach, but the Lich Acolytes can, despite being mostly undead or part undead. So you can build these early Lich Acolytes, they're 2 recruitment points each, or 2 CP each. And they can get to preaching in your provinces. They can go building temples and so on to raise your dominion so that you can build your better troops and commanders and things. So worth getting these at the start of the game, certainly, because it's only Dominion 1 to recruit. On the first turn, you cannot recruit a Tomb Prince. You cannot recruit a Tomb Herald. And I believe all the other ones are 2 high Dominion as well. So you're going to be recruiting a Lich Acolyte, basically. Yeah, they have their national spells they can cast using the H1. I believe there's some national spells they can cast, and obviously they can do blessing of your sacreds and things. 90 gold for 9 research points is fine, not too bad. So you can build a lot of these guys during the game to power your research. Then we've got our mid-level and basically our main magic user, which is the Lich Priest. Full-blown Lich Priest, very similar to the Acolyte, except that he's a much better mage and he's an H2. So he starts off with D2, he's got H2, and then his randoms are 2 of the same randoms, the fire, air, earth, astral randoms. So you can get astral 2s with them, you can get earth 2s with them, you can get kind of other cross paths and things going on with them. Like you can get the earth and astral cross path, which can be useful for quite a few different things, forging certain items and so on. I'm not doing a guide to all of the things you can do with these. But obviously, a big part of it is just the fact that they're always death 2, so you can rely on casting lots of death spells, and there's more national spells you can get at priest level 2. They are fairly expensive, 195 gold, and they do require Dominion 4 or greater to recruit, so you're not going to be able to get them straight away when you put a fort usually, unless you have your forts put in places that are high Dominion, and early on in the game, it takes a little bit of time before you can get your Dominion up and start producing Lich Priest, but those are your kind of mainline mage and battle mage. Your other battle mage and absolutely essential mage is the Necrotect, and these are partly essential because they have the Mason ability, which means they can upgrade your forts. So you can get to, I believe you can get to a 3 CP fort in each of your forts using the Necrotect. You'll want to get one relatively early on and set him to upgrade your capital to the full upgraded form. It's very powerful to do that. They are sacred, but they don't have any holy levels, and then they always have Earth 2, Death 2, so quite a lot of nice spells they can cast with those. But if you're getting them just for the paths, then of course they're a less good battle mage than the Lich Priest. They're more expensive, and they don't have the Holy 2 to go with it. So 210 gold cost in Death 3 scales, and required Dominion 4 plus to recruit, so again, a little bit tricky to get some of those. But they do have some other abilities they come with. They have siege bonus of 15, which is not nothing, although you should have pretty good siege strength on the offense as the Tomb Kings. And they have a resource bonus of 5, and this is not really a big deal, resource bonus of 5, but having a few Necrotects around can be very helpful for just recruiting a few things. And yeah, pretty useful. And they have some unique spells, which I'll get to a bit later when I'm looking at the national spells, which can improve your statuary, which tends to be your very best troops that are available to you. So that is the Necrotect. Now we're moving on to the namesake of the nation, the Tomb Kings. We've got 1 on foot and 1 on a chariot. The things I said about the Tomb Prince and the chariot also apply here, but these are very similar. So let's just look at the Tomb King first. Tomb Kings come with Holy 3. They come with all of these same, because they're mummified, they have the same susceptibility to fire that you may want to do something about, and then they have the same resistances from being undead. They have pierce resistance, cold resistance, poison resistance, etc., which is a nice starting point, of course, for being a thug or even a super combatant, but you want to bear in mind the vulnerabilities of being undead, of course, but those are slightly mitigated by the fact that they have Dominion Immortality, and rather than their Dominion Immortality taking 9 months to reform their body, it takes only 5 months for these to reform their body. So you are, although it's worse to lose a Tomb King than it is to lose a Tomb Prince, if you lose it in your Dominion, you do get them back quicker. They have Taskmaster, which we will get to in the national spells, and they have Blood Vengeance. Blood Vengeance can be excellent, particularly if you've got a method of restoring your health continuously, like giving yourself regeneration or healing yourself in some way, or increasing your total number of hit points. Blood Vengeance means that any damage that's done to you, if the source that did the damage does not pass an MR check against 12 on the Blood Vengeance, they also just take that damage, and it's completely untyped pure damage. They don't get to use protection or resistances against it at all. So if you've got something that is hurting your Tomb Kings, then a lot of the time they have a chance to hurt it back. If it's very high magic resistance mages and things, then they're probably not going to manage to do that. But sometimes they will. So sometimes they will just randomly kill an enemy mage that's managed to hurt them with like a dust to dust or something, which is kind of cool. They also have Death Curse, and they are tier 3, so they have Unsurroundability 3 as well as plenty of hit points, good protection, great magic resistance. And in terms of being military leaders, they are excellent. Tons of undead, some normal units, 40 magic beings. They can lead plenty of animated constructs, and they give a squad morale bonus and can do formations. Oh, I forgot to mention, but we should go back to this, that the Necrotects have excellent magic leadership abilities, so they can lead big formations of the animated units, the statues, and the Lich Priests have no magic leadership because they are in charge of the kind of undead side of things. They're not part of the statuary cult that is in charge of the animated statues. But the Tomb King has authority over everyone, so they have authority over both undead and the animated statues. So, this is the Tomb King. He costs 210 gold in Deathly Scales, which honestly is not terribly expensive for how powerful he is, considering that he's an H3. Having an H3 is obviously excellent because it means that you can have someone extra to go and take thrones, and you can, of course, use him to do various H3 big spells and stuff like that. Although you cannot use Tomb Kings to preach because they are true undead and therefore cannot preach. So, yeah, don't rely on them for doing that. They require Dominion 6 plus to recruit, so at the start of the game, not something you're going to be recruiting, you need to pump up your Dominion, and if you are the kind of player who takes a very low Dominion score, then you want to be aware that you're going to want to pump it up with temples and things so that you're able to build these. The Chariot version is, as we've talked about before, very similar, just like with the Prince. I would say that I prefer the on-foot version quite a bit in the case of the Tomb Kings, but if you need a size 4, he can do some size 4 stuff. He is more able to repel things because of the extra length through his Eternal Blade. And the trampling can be funny and useful. Oh, I should talk about the weapons a little. He has the Grasp of the King, which is the Tomb King basically just grabbing things with his hand and crushing them. That's why this is armor piercing and is magic. And if it does damage, it does a magic resistance negates version of decay. So it can be occasionally very funny and useful against something expensive and dangerous on the enemy side. Even if you get killed by it, maybe you'll decay it. But yeah, Grasp the King is nice because high damage and armor piercing, although not terribly accurate. And they have the Eternal Blade, which is this very, very cool single hand, excellently statted weapon, which does slashing magic damage, 9, and has 2 attack, 2 defense. So pumps up their stats and allows them to reliably slaughter stuff. So that is both forms of the Tomb King. I really like how the graphics came out for this, by the way. I think this is one of my favourite graphics. Very opulent look and at the same time somewhat terrifying. Then we have, so these can only be recruited in the capital, and then we have one more capital-only recruiting commander, which is the Lich High Priest. The Lich High Priest is very much like the Lich Priest, except he has guaranteed Death 3, he has guaranteed Fire 1, he's still Holy 2, he doesn't actually have more priestly authority, he's just kind of a more important mage in a way. He has better leadership abilities, is very slightly tougher and better statted, but there's not much in it. Quite a bit more expensive, 240 gold and Dominion 6 plus to recruit versus 195 gold and Dominion 4 plus to recruit. And of course capital only. And then his randoms, he has the same 2 randoms, but then he also has this extra 10% random. Nothing you can count on here in this extra 10% random, but if you were trying to get an S3 or an E3 or something, I guess it technically makes it possible, but forget about it statistically speaking. The reason to get the Lich High Priest is for the Death 3 and for a higher chance of getting higher levels of fire magic, I suppose, because it's more feasible to get an Fire 2 is much more likely, of course, and you can even get a Fire 3 potentially. So Yeah, that's the reason to get the Lich High Priest, but the Death 3 is obviously one of the most exciting things. So that is all of your recruitable commanders. Let's have a quick look at the heroes that you can get. You have two types of heroes, as with all Warhammer mods. You've got your multi-heroes, who are based on the luck scales, and you have your luck independent heroes, which are just a set chance each turn to turn up. So let's look at the multi-heroes first. So we've got the Chariot Tomb King is a multi-hero, the On Foot Tomb King is a multi-hero, and the Lich High Priest is a multi-hero. So all of your capital only commanders, and those are all 4 recruitment points, I believe. Yes, 4 CP for all of those. They take 2 turns in your capital to recruit each of those, but you've got them there as multi-heroes, so that can be a nice bonus to get some of those. It's certainly really nice getting like a Tomb King or a Lich High Priest in the early turns. Then you've got your luck independent heroes. So you've got 3 pretty different heroes here. The first of them is Apophis, the Cursed Scarab Prince. Apophis is a very strange hero. He is a bit of a combat brute. He doesn't really have any magic or anything, but he's really vicious in combat, and he can blink in combat, so it's the equivalent of flying, but he just teleports. He can pass through walls, I believe. He has, if he's struck down in combat, he can reform. There's a 20% chance he'll just come back to life instead of dying. He also has Dominion Immortality of 3 months. If he gets killed in his Dominion, he's quite quick to reappear and keep working for you, so he can be a real annoying pain in the opponent's side. But the thing that's really nasty about him is that he is an assassin. So he has built-in assassin. He's not terribly patient as an assassin, so he will run into bodyguards and things, but he is a really nasty assassin. In combat, his abilities are Unsurroundable 3, so he's tier 3, plenty of hit points, built-in regeneration of 10%, so he starts off regenerating 4 hit points every single round, and of course you can push this up and make his hit points higher in theory. He has fear, he has pierce resistance, and then he has these extra nice resistances. He's not vulnerable to fire, unlike the mummified guys, because he is not mummified. He's made out of a living cloud of scarab beetles that are kind of propping him up. And then he has 2 very nice weapons. He has the Soul Reaper. So the Soul Reaper is a nice magical weapon, good stats, good damage. And then if it hits, so it doesn't have to do damage, but just if it hits the opponent, then it does Consume Soul. Consume Soul is magic resistance negates, and doesn't affect mindless beings, but it does extremely kill something and will give the life taken from consuming the soul to Apophis himself. So yeah, Consume Soul is extremely nasty. Makes him terrifying to large combatants and things, and of course, because he's an assassin, that's pumped up. I think, given that he's an assassin, if he dies, I'd have to check on this, but I'm pretty sure if he dies in the assassination battle, that doesn't count in terms of him coming back to life through immortality. I think that happens in like a special place, so it's not in your Dominion. Big sip of Coke. But yeah, I'm not sure about that. I would have to check on that. And then his other ability is the Swarm of Bites, which does 4 attacks, so tons and tons of attacks, and they are armor piercing, although they are very weak. And you can't use it for repelling, although they can't be repelled. So this is very weak, but it's armor piercing. So if something doesn't have the best protection, he can kind of tear it apart with a Swarm of Bites. But it's not super important. It's really the Soul Reaper is the big thing there. So yeah, very nasty, nasty, nasty assassin and killer of big things. Then there's the Grand Hierophant. That's Katep. So Katep is a super mage. He is one of the best mages in the game. He has excellent stats and things. He has the very high hit points and things that your Lich Priests don't. But then he also has Fire 2, Air 2, Earth 2, Astral 2, and Death 3. So he's like almost like a Rainbow Pretender's worth of magic. And he is a Holy 3 as well. Not much more to say about the Grand Hierophant except that he is just exceptionally good as a mage, and obviously you can use him for site searching and you can use him to cast lots of rituals. He doesn't give you access into any paths that you did not otherwise have. You can technically get all of these paths on your Lich Priest and things. He's just the kind of jack of all trades and master of all trades mage that you can get. Then we have the Necrotect Visionary. So where Katep was like a pumped up Lich High Priest, the Necrotect Visionary Ramhotep is a pumped up Necrotect. So rather than coming with Earth 2, Death 2, he has Earth 3, Death 2. He is still sacred, he still has Mason, he still has all this other good stuff, but his resource bonus, his castle defense, and his siege bonus are higher, and he has a castle defense bonus as well. Not much of a melee combatant, of course, but he is an excellent mage, and he casts Summon Earth Power at the start of every battle automatically with no cost to himself. So on turn 0, you get Summon Earth Power, which takes him up to Earth 4. So he can cast the big Earth spells early in the battle, and he benefits from the reinvigoration from Summon Earth Power, so he doesn't have to waste a turn casting Summon Earth Power. So very nice for casting big Earth spells. He's also very good with the national spells that they have. Speaking of national spells, it's time to have a look at those now. So I will be looking at the national spells, and I'll also be referring to the Tomb Kings Summons Another site, which gives you the stats for these various ones. So it gives you the Shouty and the Necro 7 as well, but it also gives you your summons that we'll be looking at. So let's go and look at the national spells right now. So starting off in Conjuration, we have at level 4 Call Carrion, and that's it. Let's have a look at Call Carrion. So for 12 death gems and 2 death, 1 air, so pretty easy to get. You can get that with a Lich Priest. You can of course get it with a Lich High Priest very easily. You can potentially even get it with an Acolyte with a booster you could use to Call Carrion. So for 12 death gems, you get 4 Carrion, and I will go and show you what Carrion are now. Here is the Carrion. The Carrion is a flying bag of hit points that doesn't hit terribly hard, but it does have 2 attacks, and it is sacred. It requires no gold upkeep. It's not a great fighter. It's kind of fragile because it doesn't have much protection, but it does come with a patrol bonus of 3. So what we've got here is these are effectively 3 death gems each. You can use them as patrollers using their patrol bonus, and you can use them for kind of like, attack rear type stuff. And if you've got the right bless, that can actually be pretty strong with them. So I would say definitely worth having some of these to, in the mix, disrupt the opponent, do some patrolling and the like. You have nothing national in alteration, nothing national in evocation, but then in construction at level 0, so right at the start of the game before doing any research, you have the Necrotect mantra, which is super important, and the Necrotect incantation. Nothing else, but let's have a look at those. So for 2 Earth, E2, we have the Necrotect mantra. This can only be cast by a Necrotect or a Necrotect Visionary, so you can't use your E2 Lich High Priests to cast these. Completely precise, and they target not mindless beings, only magic beings, not demons or undead, not enemy units. Can't cast them underwater and can only be cast by Taskmaster. So this is only for casting on your animated statues, basically. I don't think there's anything in the base game that you can cast this on, but you can certainly cast it on them. Or maybe there are some things that you can cast it on in the base game, I'm not sure. But yeah, you grant regenerative properties to a single animated construct. So it's only a single target, it's not area effect, which is why it's got this very high precision. But yeah, you can give regeneration to a non-mindless, non-undead, non-demon magic being, your war statues. So regeneration put on those guys is fantastic. It's best if you put it on one of your very big ones, which we'll be looking at in a moment with your summons, but it's also really good on the Sepulchral Stalker, and it's really good if you get it onto the Tomb Scorpion. Both of those have quite a few hit points, and of course they have tons of protection because they are war statues, so that can be absolutely great, and you can cast it with any of your Necrotects, which you should have quite a few of. The Necrotect incantation, so that's E2, so they can easily cast that. The Necrotect incantation is much harder for them to cast. They start at E2, so they need to get to E4, so you would need to use, let's say, a booster and summon Earth Power, but the Necrotect incantation gives quickness, and that quickness is area effect 1. So it's basically the same kind of spell, but instead of giving regeneration, it is quickness, and instead of giving it to a single target, it's AoE 1. So you can hit, for instance, 2 Shabti with that spell, and quickness can, of course, be really great. They're 0 encumbrance, so they're not affected by the fact that quickness can tire people out, and it can help them get their hits in, and it can help them hit quickly and a lot. And again, you will be able to cast this on your very big stuff, and that's where it's most effective. But of course, yeah, putting it on the Ashabti is also very nice. So another very strong spell to use with your Necrotect if you can get it to go off. Of course, it's easiest to cast it with Ramhotep, who starts the battle effectively at E4 because of the Summon Earth power that he does. Then in Enchantment, we have at level 3, Animate Ushabti. So this is 16 Earth Gems. It's Earth 2 and Death 1, so the Necrotext can happily cast it. It can be cast by casters that aren't the Necrotext, I believe. Yes, that is true. It can be cast by the some of your Lich High Priest can cast Animate Ushabti. You get four Earth Gems each. So yeah, 4 Earth Gems each. You get 4 Ashabti, and they are the randomized ones. So you have dual compasses, 2-handed glaives, or really powerful bows. This is definitely, I would say, worth using if you just want to quickly beef up your forces of Ashabti, get more of them out there. Obviously, you can just recruit them, but this allows you to get them into places where you don't have the Dominion to recruit them, maybe you don't have the resources to recruit them, or you just need them quickly. This is also an absolutely clutch spell if you're in a terrible situation, you're like under siege, or you've dashed your forces and managed to take a throne, and you just need to quickly get more stuff there. Then the Ashabti can be a fantastic spell there. And 4 Earth Gems is not too much for an Ashabti, really. They're pretty good for that cost. So moving on, at level 4 we have the Necropolis Knights. So these are 3 death and 1 air. So you're going to need a booster to be casting this with your Lich Priest, but your Lich High Priest with a random of air, you will be able to cast it. So we're paying 14 Death Gems, and you get 4. So it's a little bit cheaper than the Ashabti in terms of Earth Gems. These are Death Gems, but you get Necropolis Knights. So again, very similar situation to the Ashabti. Definitely worth doing sometimes. Up to you how many of your Death Gems you want to put in there, but you will have more Death Gems almost certainly during the game than you will have Earth Gems. Moving up to level 5 research, we have Unleash the Stalkers, which is 2 Earth, 1 Death, so this is the same path cost as the Animator Ashabti. And you get 3 of them for 15, so they're 5 gems each. Of course, they are more expensive than the Ashabti. And you get Sepulchral Stalkers, so I think this is perhaps slightly less attractive just because it's up higher research, so you can't rush this as much. But Sepulchral Stalkers can be really good, and obviously they've got that single target, nasty, petrifying and armor negating damage they can do. So in some circumstances, you definitely want to have those. Moving up into level 6, we get our first completely new thing, which is Animate War Sphinx. 2 Earth, 2 Death, so you can cast it with your Necrotect, you can cast it with your Lich High Priests, and you can cast it with your Lich Priest potentially. So there's a few different ones that can cast Animate War Sphinx, and you get the Kemrian War Sphinx. So let's go and have a look at those now. So here is the Kemrian War Sphinx. I love the graphic for the War Sphinx. I think it's fantastic. He's absolutely huge, and of course he's got this little fortress on his back with some tomb guard with very long spears. He is a troop, he's not a commander, and he is colossally tough, 90 hit points, size 6. Protection is 25, so incredibly, incredibly tough and hard to take out. But he does have the usual disadvantages of being, a magic being and so on. Although, and he does not heal except in labs. Although he does have magic resistance 18, which makes him, harder for those magic resistance check anti-magic being spells to take him out. But if someone could moonblade him and so on. He has some very nice effects in combat. He has got a claw and a bite, and they both do respectable damage. I wouldn't say that's great damage considering he's this massive destructive force, but not too bad. That's 2 attacks. Then we have the Howdah Spears, the fortress in the back, these guys spearing stuff down. You get 2 attacks from that, and of course they're pretty high damage and they're magic because they're being done with these tomb spears. They're also good length. Now, when repelling, you only get to count this once. The fact that its number of attacks 2 doesn't matter, but still, having that can be useful to repel some attacks and keep them going. But then you also have the Sickle Tail, which is area effect 1. So this is crucial for hitting things that have really great defense, obviously, and the fact that it's area effect 1, it can hit multiple things at a time. at a time. Although they do have defense negates on there, so I tell a lie when I said it's good against things with really great defense. Against things with really great defense, it is going to struggle to hit them, but still, it can hit multiple things at a time. It does good damage. So the sickle tail, claw bite, howdah spears. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we've got a thing that hits everything in area 1. So this can kill quite a lot of things every turn, in addition to being ungodly tough. Slash and pierce resistant with huge amounts of protection and good magic resistance, and it's unbreakable. And it has fear. It can also go underwater, which is nice. And then finally, it has the Fire Breath. Fire Breath is the same effect, I believe, that the Fire Drakes have. So he fires it out like in a cone in front of him, and it does good damage. It's armor piercing. And yeah, its range is increased by the fact that he's got very high strength. You get 4 shots with that, and like a big dragon, he will just roll around blasting stuff. So what does the War Sphinx do? Well, it's kind of super tanky. It draws a lot of fire because it's high hit points. It's very, very, very durable because of the protection and magic resistance. And it can kill quite a lot of basic stuff. I don't think it's that good against really powerful single targets because it struggles to hit them. And it doesn't do that much damage, even if it does hit them. It definitely benefits from having its strength boosted. That boosts its attacks up a lot, including making its fire breath better. So if you can do that, that's great. If you put regeneration and quickness on it, which you are well able to do, it can be absolutely terrifying. So that is the Kemrian War Sphinx. But is that worth 30 Earth Gems? 30 Earth Gems is a lot to pay for something that is effectively just a big, dumb, scary troop. I think if you put the right buffs on it, then yeah, it can be worth 30 Earth Gems, but it is a bit of a kind of a showing off prestige summon, I would say, the War Sphinx. So, but let me know if you find a use for it. Nothing else up in enchantment, and we're moving on into thaumaturgy. In thaumaturgy, we have a couple of nice summons. The first of which is Wake a Necrolith Colossus, but I'm going to mention the Tomb That Scuttles before talking about that. So Tomb That Scuttles is 8 Death Gems. It gives you 1 Tomb Scorpion. We've already looked at the Tomb Scorpion, of course, and it is 3 Death and 1 Fire, so you'll be casting that with your Lich High Priests. But yeah, is a Tomb Scorpion worth 8 Death Gems? I think it's a similar discussion to we had about Sepulchral Stalkers and things. In some circumstances, definitely yes, you would cast that. In other circumstances, you would just go, no, I mean, I can recruit that if I want to, and maybe I don't even want to. And Death Gems are worth too much to spend on that. But I would say pretty good, and in desperation situations, a good thing to funnel Death Gems into. The Necrolith Colossus is a little different. This is Death 3 and 1 Earth Gem, so you can cast it with your Necrotex with a booster, or you can cast it with your Lich High Priests or Lich Priests. Lich Priest with a booster certainly could do it, and the Lich High Priest can sometimes do it himself. 15 Death Gems. This is a unit that is somewhat similar to the War Sphinx, but of course it's looking at about half the price in terms of Death Gems. You get the Necrolith Colossus. Here is the description of that, and I will now show you the 2 different types. There is one that comes with a Khopesh, and one that comes with a powerful bow that draws power from the underworld. So here are the 2 Necrolith Colossi. The first of them is the one with the bow, and we'll look at the kind of base stats here as well. So we get a big, tanky, kind of an ape-like big statue skeleton. But he is a statue more than he is like an undead or skeleton. He isn't an undead, he is magic. He has the same things as the other war statues. He's just in the form of a skeleton creature. He has excellent protection, being a war statue. He has pretty good magic resistance. He has lots of hit points, not as many as the War Sphinx, but still lots of hit points. And he is colossally strong, much stronger than the War Sphinx, an extra 4 points there. The Colossus in combat, you've got the one with the Khopesh, which is the better at melee, and this is the archer version. But this version still has a stone fist he can just punch things with. Not particularly good, not particularly accurate, but he can hit things with the stone fist. And then he has the giant stomp. Giant stomp can be negated by large or strong beings because they're big or strong enough to avoid just being stomped on by him. But it is area effect 1, so he can use the giant stomp to squash some annoying troops that come up to him, and that is not defense negate. Doesn't matter how much defense you've got, only whether you're big or strong to avoid being stepped on by him. He has the Bow of the Desert then as his ranged weapon. So range 50, that's a longer range than a longbow. I think longbow is range 45. It is very accurate. He has precision 12, and then the Bow of the Desert has precision 5 to add on to that, so pretty accurate. And it is terrifyingly damaging. The Bow of the Desert, it's magic and it's piercing, and it does 28 base plus his strength takes it up to 36 damage. So 36 damage at range. If you get close and you can land this accurately, then being able to do this and ignore stuff, the defense that things have, and ignore various melee defenses they have, and the fact that it's magic, you can really obliterate some stuff with this. In addition to hitting really, 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 really hard and having tons of ammunition, because he's just firing basically arrows from the underworld. Also, if you wherever it lands, rather, it doesn't need to hit, just wherever this shot lands, you get a soul explosion. So the soul explosion is area effect 1, so it's just a boom explosion. It does 15 magic armor piercing damage, which is pretty nasty. Yeah, 15 armor piercing damage is enough to destroy some very, very tough stuff. You don't get to add the strength of the wielder, but it is difficult to negate with magic resistance, and it doesn't affect friendly units. So when he's firing away, this can just blow holes in stuff. If you land this on a square of knights, for instance, you've got two kind of elite knights in there, their magic resistance may not be up to snuff, and they might just get evaporated by the soul explosion, even if the damage from the bow doesn't land on any of them. So pretty terrifying, and I would say, yeah, this is pretty much worth the 15 death gems. And then we have the Kopesh version. So the Kopesh version, I would say, slightly kind of less interesting in special. He just wrecks stuff in close combat. He has the same Stone Fist, he has the same Giant Stomp, and he has this Tomb Kopesh, which we know, we're familiar. The Tomb Kopesh is the weapon that's also used by the Tomb Guard. But in his hands, not as accurate as them, but hits incredibly hard. So the Tomb Kopesh can be nice for just brutalizing something with damage. None of these Necrolyth Colossi cost any upkeep, of course, in terms of gold, and you can throw all of the same buffs on them that you would do with the other units we were talking about. So this is another one of the big units that you can throw buffs on. Are they worth the death gems? I prefer the Archer over the Kopesh one, but either one of them can be really good. I would say a downside of them is that they don't cause fear. So moving on in Thaumaturgy, nothing at level 5, but then at level 6 we get in Soul Hierotitan. Very expensive at 35 death gems. 3 death and 1 astral to cast, so you can cast it with Lich High Priest with a booster, and you can cast it with, Lich Priest with a booster, and Lich High Priest can cast it, it just has an astral random. So not particularly hard to get to in Soul Hierotitan. You get an Hierotitan, he is a commander, not a troop, so let us go and have a look at the Hierotitan and see if it is worth 35 death gems. Here is the Hierotitan. So remember, 35 death gems, and significant amount of research and a mage turn, so we have to consider that when we're looking at how strong he is. But the Hierotitan is very tasty, I would say. I'm also super fond of the sprite they ended up doing for him. I think this looks really cool, and he looks really cool on the battlefield as well. So, stats-wise, kind of similar to the Necrolyth Colossus, but a bit less hit points, not quite as strong. He has very slightly better protection, and he has better magic resistance. He's not much of a leader, not much in the way of leadership. That's not really his job. And he isn't a magic user, he isn't a priest, and his item slots are not terribly exciting. It's crown only and then 2 misc, but you can put some interesting things on him, I guess. So you could kind of turn him into a thug because he has such nice beefy stats here, and you could put some items on him to do that. But he's kind of more interesting for his unusual effects that he has. So the first of these is that he spreads magic. So the province he's in will move towards magic scales. If you haven't taken Magic 3, which you may not have for this nation, then that can actually be quite exciting because obviously if it's a load of researchers there, you can end up getting a significant boost to your research just from having a Hierotitan there. He also is a Dominion spreader, so he is always blessed. Of course, he is sacred, and he's always blessed. And he spreads Dominion. It wouldn't be worth buying these guys just to spread Dominion, but it is a nice thing. It's the same as the ability the Prophet has, where he just can spread Dominion as he moves around. But let's have a look at these weapons, because this is the kind of really interesting bit. So he has let's get the less interesting things out of the way first. He has the Giant Stomp. It's the same as with the Necrolyth Colossus. He can just step on people. He also has a magic staff, which he can use to repel, and it's not absurd that he would repel some things with this. Length 4 and 13 attack. He hits super hard with the magic staff because he is big and strong. And it's two-handed, of course. And it has great stats. It boosts up his defense, but his defense doesn't matter that much because he is, of course, a big boy and is going to get surrounded and has no ability to stop people from surrounding him. But then he also has these three: Judgment of Assyrian, Light of Petra, and Fire of Petra. So the Judgment of Assyrian is area of effect 5. It's a melee weapon. It is difficult to negate with magic resistance. Does 10 armor negating magic damage. Doesn't hit mindless, doesn't hit undead, doesn't hit inanimate, and doesn't hit friendlies. Most of your friendlies are going to be these things anyway. But basically, every time he uses the Judgment of Assyrian, a big chunk of stuff around him is going to have to pass a difficult magic resistance check or take 10 armor negating damage. So he can use this to just blast holes in stuff that doesn't have the best magic resistance and is, valuable, has loads of protection and so on. It's just a nice way of him clearing out tons and tons of chaff and things like that. So pretty nice. Then he has the Light of Petra and Fire of Petra, which are ranged weapons. So Light of Petra, range 40, extremely accurate, as you can see. It has precision 25 there, so he ends up with 39 precision. Same for the Fire of Petra. This one is 16 armor piercing damage in area effect 1. So very accurate. 16 armor piercing damage in area effect 1 is already pretty attractive and cool. And then it has ×2 damage versus demons. So if you are hitting demons, you are then hitting them for 32 armor piercing damage. So if your opponent has valuable, expensive demons, the Light of Petra will absolutely just destroy them, just blow holes in them. Very, very strong even against super combatants. And it then causes small area fire, which is, less interesting, but is extra damage in that one square. So he can really destroy a square with this. And then he has Fire of Petra, which is a much bigger area of effect. It does less damage and is armor piercing. There's no multiplier or anything, but yeah, area of effect 6, so he can use the Light of Petra, 30 ammunition, and the Fire of Petra, 30 ammunition, to sit at the back of the battlefield and just act like magical artillery, just absolutely exploding tons of units, especially if he's hitting big strong demons. Is that worth 35 death gems? I think he's kind of like the Abomination with its like instant death gaze thing that it has. So yeah, I would say a lot of the time worth 35 death gems. If you use the Hydra Titan and find that he is busted, I would not be totally surprised if I have made a bit of a mistake in terms of balancing him, because these are kind of hard to balance abilities. But I would be interested to know, obviously, if you get quickness on him, that is very exciting as well for using all of this stuff. Then you don't have any natural spells in Blood Magic, but you do have some priest spells that I would like to take a look at. So these spells don't turn up in... I'm just looking at a Lich Acolyte here, which is where I can only cast these ones, the basic ones. These spells don't turn up in the research menus because they're not research, they're divine spells, specifically for your priests. And I believe they are, if I right-click one of them, they can only be cast by taskmasters. So you can't get independent priests to be casting things like this. It's just your own priests that have taskmaster. So we've got a couple of spells for summoning lots of small, nasty little critters. First is Kepra Scorpions, which is Holy 1, Death 1. And you can kind of think of this, you get 4 of them, and you can kind of think of this as being very similar to the Horde of Skeletons or Raised Dead, but you don't have to research it. And this one has historically proven to be a little bit too strong, so I may be reducing the number of effects that you get of this. But you summon up some Kepra Scorpions. I'll show you Kepra Scorpions in a moment, but you get 4 of them from this. And from Tomb Swarm, which is Holy 3 and Death 3, so you're going to be casting it with your Lich High Priests basically only, or I guess a prophetized and boosted Lich Priest. In fact, in order to cast it, yeah, your Lich High Priest only have Holy 2, so you would need to get their Holy up by prophetizing them to cast this. So Tomb Swarm, much harder for them to cast. Or I guess you could boost them using Light of the Northern Stars, things like that. But Tomb Swarm, much harder to cast. You get 16 of them instead of 4 of them. So let's go and have a look at the Kepra Scorpions, and then I'll talk about the chants. Here is a Kepra Scorpion. It's undead. It has bad magic resistance. That means that these are going to get destroyed by banish spells a lot. It has very, 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 very few hit points. So you might be looking at this and thinking, okay, this is not as good as a long dead. Why would I take this over a long dead? Well, it's got similar stuff to the long dead, like it's mindless. This one's actually undisciplined, but it doesn't matter because you're summoning it in combat anyway. Well, the reason that you would take it over them is that it's size 1, so you can have swarms of these cramming into 6 of them inside one square. Is 6 sting attacks coming out from one square, so you can overwhelm things with sting attacks. And the sting attack itself is armor piercing, so this works absolutely fantastically if you can throw a giant strength, strength of giants on the Kepra Scorpion. That's extremely good. It can't be repelled, and then it does weak poison if it does manage to damage them, so you can poison stuff to death. So if you manage to up their strength, or if you're dealing with things that don't have enough protection that they can reliably never get hit by the sting, this can just end up poisoning things. And they're relatively good at landing it. 10 attack is enough when they're at size 1, so the Kepra Scorpion has proven to generally be better than its stats would indicate. So back to the divine spells, we have the Chant of Healing, Chant of Resilience, Chant of the Undying, and Chant of Might. Chant of Healing is very straightforward. It does healing on friendly troops. It has a big area of effect, and it only affects undead stuff. You can't use it to heal up your war statues as much as you would love to, because they don't heal normally, but this heals your non-mindless undead, so you just use it to heal up your damaged things like Tomb Kings and stuff. It's not terribly exciting, but it can be a kind of a clutch spell for just keeping a Tomb King alive, basically. I wouldn't really worry about it too much on your basic infantry and things that don't have enough hit points. This would be very relevant. Then we've got the Chant of Resilience, which is Holy 2. Area of Effect 4+. So basically almost always 4, but you can do more with your profit perhaps. Now this chant means that you can put bark skin and fire resistance, so effectively bark skin without having the extra fire vulnerability, onto non-mindless undead. So it's good for casting on anything where you just need them to be tougher. Bark skin obviously works very well with things that already have armor that can combo with it. So it can only be used on your non-mindless undead, so I would use it on things like your Necropolis Knights would benefit very well from Chant of Resilience. Tomb Guard, love Chant of Resilience. It's okay for casting on Tomb Princes and Tomb Kings. Quite a few things you can cast that on. It's just nice to have, basically. Chant of the Undying is at Holy 3, so much less likely to turn up and harder to cast. But you can, of course, cast Chant of Resilience, Chant of Healing, Chant of Might, Chant of the Undying with your Tomb Kings, because they are at Holy 3. So Chant of the Undying is really mostly for Tomb Kings. The actual Tomb King unit, not just the nation. And with this, you give regeneration to non-mindless undead. So the Tomb King can use this to give himself regeneration, which is exciting. He can another Tomb Kings, a group of them can sit there and cast Chant of the Undying to give themselves all regeneration. And regeneration is fantastic on it. Troops as well. If you've managed to get other things on them, other buffs to put their protection up, then putting the Chant of the Undying on them can be very strong. This may turn out to just be a bit too strong as a spell, although bear in mind that these chants have a 200% casting time. The healing one even has 200%. These are slow because they have to chant out these long liturgies to cast them. Finally, there's Chant of Might. Chant of Might gives enormous strength to undead on the battlefield. You cannot use this on your Kepra Scorpions, much as you might want to, because they are mindless undead, not non-mindless undead, and it is the same effect as Strength of Giants, but with a different area effect. So, Chant of Might useful on Necropolis Knights, Tomb Guard, basic infantry, Neckharm Warriors, because they have the 2 attacks. That could be great on those. Not so interesting on things like the Tomb Kings. Basically, a different set of targets from Chant of the Undying, but Chant of Resilience and Chant of Might you would put on similar stuff. So those are your divine spells, and that is all of your national spells that I wish to talk about and that exist. So moving on, we just have a brief look at the Pretender options, and then I'll talk a little bit about the scales that you might want to take. So again, this isn't a guide, so really brief look at the Pretender options. Just going to click here. We've got a variety of immobile ones that are themed kind of Middle Eastern, Egyptian, and so on. A bunch of interesting stuff there, including the God Block, the Monument, Statue of Beginnings, and the Baphomet. And then at Dominion 3, a bunch of Titans, mostly Egyptian-themed Titans. At Dominion 2, some monsters, Serpent, get involved. There are a couple of different Sphinxy flying lads, Phoenix, Lich Queen, Ghost King, and the Master Lich. So there's a bit of undead representation there. And then at Dominion 1, you just have the Serpent King. So you do have a pretty decent selection of paths here. And it's an okay Pretender selection, but you may be missing some kind of classic options that you might like. You do have the Devourer of Souls, who is a, absolute fan favorite. Look at him. Look at his little bad joke face. So moving on to scales, what scales are you likely to take with Nehekara? I'm not going to get into the blesses that you might want to take and bless strategies and expansion strategies and these kind of things, but just thinking about what scales would work thematically and what scales are kind of, I think, are kind of obvious for like the first time you try out the nation. Obviously, you start on Death 3, so by going up you to growth 3 you would have to pay a huge amount. I would never do that because everything is half price basically from Death 3, so you just have to accept you have Death 3. You also have some mitigations. You don't suffer as much from the loss of income of population and supplies don't really matter for you because you are a bunch of undead that don't eat anything. You also don't really have to worry about diseases from old age and stuff because you don't basically get old. So Death 3, just leave it at Death 3. Don't try and be cute and do a Growth 3 one, please. I mean, you can if you want, but I really wouldn't recommend it. You are pretty gold hungry, and I think the high order 3 probably is both thematic and would make sense for you to give you the gold to be able to push out your troops everywhere. It also gives you some extra recruitment points, which I think it counteracts a bit the loss of population. It doesn't entirely, because if you lose huge amounts of population, you just don't have any recruitment points left at that point. Do you want to take productivity or sloth? I would say if you're going to use the war statues, you're going to end up wanting more productivity. I think early on, being able to crank up stuff for expansion requires a bit of productivity. So maybe you would take a point or two of productivity, and that goes well with just getting you more gold as well. Heat, you'd probably take up to Heat 3. That's how most people tend to do things. Luck, you probably could risk some misfortune, but it's more of a personal choice, really. People sometimes do like to have lots of luck. And then magic-wise, well, you've got a relatively efficient research that you can pump out lots of the. You've got 90 gold researchers that cost. They give you 9 research base, so you could decide to go magic for that. Going magic is also a bit of a risk because this will decrease the magic resistance of your troops having magic. And even though they've got pretty good magic resistance, a big problem for you is just people hurling tons of banish at you. So if you have high magic, you have to bear that in mind. And a lot of the time, you do want to be pushing your Dominion and fighting inside it. Normally, I'd just be talking about scales, and I wouldn't talk that much about Dominion, but I really think an important thing with this nation is to have pretty decent Dominion, because at the start of the game, you're going to have difficulty getting your Dominion up high enough to recruit from multiple forts and things, and obviously, you are locked by your level of Dominion in a lot of things. Plus, you have things that are immortal within your own Dominion, so I think you want to take an okay amount of Dominion. You know, people often just go like, "Oh, it doesn't even matter, just 2 or 3. You know, who cares?" You could try that with Nehekara, but I think you're probably going to want a bit higher Dominion, to be honest. So that's more or less everything I want to say about the nation. I hope that you can give them a try. This has just been an overview to whet your appetite and introduce you to the nation. And yeah, give them a go. Let me know what you think. Let me know if things are too strong, too weak, or things that you'd like to see in the nation. There's some stuff I'd still like to add to them. There's some heroes like Cetra the Imperishable with his billions of titles. I would like to add him. I'd like to add, High Queen Calida, people like that. Maybe I will add some more summons or national spells at some point, but the most important thing I think is to do some balance work on these. So I'd love to have any feedback from you guys. I hope you've enjoyed watching this. I hope you give them a try. Catch me on Discord, download the mod, and so on. Thanks for watching.